30 years after the event, the death of Thomas Sankara continues to haunt Blaise Compaoré.
Top 10 famous African leaders killed by Western forces.
To see a video now.
In October 2011, NATO deliberately bombed the convoy carrying former Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi while escaping a civil war that called for his head. NATO claimed it was unaware that the former Libyan president was in one of those vehicles. But how true is that? In today's video, you will find out how the West has led conspiracies that extinguish the flames of famous African leaders. Number 10. Mehdi Ben Barka, Morocco. The salesman of the revolution, El Mehdi Ben Barka was a political activist whose very mandate was the transition of the ancient monarchy system in Morocco to a socialist government. His party, the National Union of Popular Forces, or UNPF, was seen as the main leftist party that vehemently opposed the monarchy. Ben Barka was charged with conspiracy to assassinate King Hassan II and sentenced to death in absentia. However, death didn't come immediately for the Moroccan socialist. The political move that made him an international threat was the 1965 Tricontinental Conference held in Havana, Cuba. The conference was a meticulously planned strategy to usher Latin America into the confraternity of the anti-colonialist continents that already housed Africa and Asia. This conference was happening at a crucial time, when the agitation for independence rapidly spread throughout Africa. In contrast, the colonial powers were reluctant to release their clutch on the continent. Barely a month after the conference, El Mehdi Ben Barka was whisked off the streets of Paris, never to be seen again. In his book, Arabs Lefts, Histories and Legacies from the 1950s to the 1970s, Laure Girgis revealed details about Ben Barka's disappearance. According to Girgis, Ben Barka was kidnapped by the French police on October 29, 1965. Moroccan authorities gruesomely tortured him, his body plunged in acid and afterwards buried on the outskirts of Paris. Number 9.
AMILCAR CABRAL.
AMILCAR Cabral, the famous African leader, aggressively fought for the independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, which at that time were Portuguese colonies. Cabral is known to have insisted that he and his people's fight wasn't for ideological supremacy. Rather, they sought a better standard of living, a peaceful society, and a guaranteed future for their children. That was basic enough. It was to this cause that Cabral dedicated all the strength he could muster, both politically and ideologically.
Oui, l'indépendance, pourquoi faire? Pour nous, d'abord, pour être nous-mêmes, pour être des hommes africains, avec tout ce qui nous caractérise, mais en marche pour une vie meilleure et qui puisse nous identifier chaque jour davantage avec les autres hommes dans le monde. Salazar disait que l'Afrique n'existe pas sans les Européens. C'est une exagération et les Français sont bien placés pour
Exactly 3 months before his assassination, Cabral declared that bloodthirsty Portuguese agents were after his life and had already invaded his home. As expected after his death, the Portuguese authorities denied all allegations of involvement, but guess what? The culprit charged with Cabral's assassination claimed to be working for the Portuguese government. Number 8. Olimpio of Togo. At number 8, we have Olimpio Sylvanus, Togo's beloved nationalist. When Olimpio Sylvanus sought the independence of Togo, he faced an overwhelming obstacle in his path. The French colonial authority insisted that the small West African country must pay a jaw-dropping 800 million francs.
Are you stupid or something?
As the cost of its colonial administration. It was no small task, but Olympio understood that independence in colossal debt could not be considered true freedom. With this in mind, he worked extremely hard, utilizing his education as a trained economist to ensure that this huge amount was paid and his beloved country was free from the strong grasp of France. And indeed, France was paid after 2 full years.
Congratulations, Africa.
However, Togo's arduous journey to freedom was yet to be over. The French authorities were unyielding to Olympio's idea of an independent Togo, free of foreign interference, with the interest of all Togolese taking preeminence. Olympio's attempt to establish a national currency for Togo based on the nation's available resources broke the camel's back. This move meant that the country would no longer use the French franc, a currency that had been previously forced on all French colonies at gunpoint. France would have none of it. With the help of the United States, the French government ordered the assassination of Olympio Sylvanus. On January 13th, 1963, there was heavy gunfire within the country's presidential palace. Sensing the situation, Olympio ensured his family's safety while he scaled over the palace's walls into the US Embassy just next door. He was discovered to be hiding in one of the cars within the compound by Leon B. Polada, the ambassador to the United States. The ambassador claimed to be without the keys to the building. He asked Olympio to wait for some minutes while he went to fetch the key. Unfortunately for Olympio, it was a ploy by the ambassador to reveal his location to his enemies. A few minutes later, Olympio was yanked out of the car and shot in cold blood by Etienne Iedema. Number 7. RUBEN NYOBE, Cameroon.
L'unification immédiate du Cameroun, la constitution d'un conseil de gouvernement et d'une assemblée avec des pouvoirs législatifs, et enfin la fixation d'un délai pour l'octroi de l'indépendance au peuple camerounais. Telles sont, Monsieur le Président, les questions sur lesquelles le peuple de mon pays m'a mandaté pour venir ici. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
The George Washington of Cameroon, was an anti-imperialist and energetic freedom fighter. NYOBE founded the Union des Populations du Cameroun, or the UPC, through which he made strong nationalist movements in Cameroon. One such is the non-violent resistance movement in Cameroon's equatorial forest, credited to have reverberated as strongly as the one held by Indian nationalist Mahatma Gandhi. This made NYOBE the most dangerous obstacle to France's colonial interest in the country, visible hate that NYOBE was aware of, but remained resolute in pursuing an independent Cameroon. For 3 consecutive years, 1952, 1953, and 1954, NYOBE publicly condemned the French colonial authority in Cameroon while appearing before the United Nations General Assembly. He demanded immediate independence for Cameroon within a fixed deadline and a legislative assembly for Cameroon. This public embarrassment agitated a violent response within the French colonial authority. In 1955, NYOBE's agile UPC was attacked, and many members were exiled or eliminated. September 13, 1958, barely 3 years after UPC was widely persecuted, NYOBE was assassinated in a skirmish by the French forces. His nationalist writings were destroyed, and Cameroonians were not permitted to talk about him, not even mention his name. Number 6. Pierre MULELE, from Congo. Pierre MULELE was the Minister of Education in the Democratic Republic of Congo during the administrative regime of Patrice Lumumba. 2 years after the US and Belgium orchestrated the coup that ended Lumumba's life, MULELE established a rebellion against the corrupt Congolese government headed by Mobutu, who enjoyed a romantic relationship with Western powers. The famous Simba Rebellion lasted 5 years, but in the end, the rebel forces were heavily defeated. After this embarrassing defeat, MULELE immediately went into exile. However, the Marxist was lured back to Congo by Mobutu under the guise of amnesty. Upon his return, MULELE was immediately arrested and killed in a very horrible way. He was first gruesomely tortured, his ears and nose chopped off, his limbs crudely amputated, and his eyes plucked out of their sockets while he was still alive.
Come on, man.
Number 5. Eduardo Mondlane from Mozambique. Eduardo Chivambo Mondlane, the famous founder of the Mozambican Liberation Front, or FRELIMO, is a trained anthropologist and one of the country's leading men due to his academic prowess and nationalist contributions. In 1964, Mondlane led FRELIMO to a guerrilla war with 2 objectives in mind. One was the immediate independence of Mozambique, and the other was a transition into a socialist system of government. However, FRELIMO would have internal division, as a faction of the movement did not favour the idea of a socialist system. Mondlane was re-elected in 1968 for his second term as the movement's president. This time, he adopted the People's War approach, which was essentially gathering the overwhelming support of the local people in the fight for independence. But on February 3rd, 1969, Mondlane was assassinated via a letter bomb sent to his office at the FRELIMO headquarters in Tanzania. Accusatory fingers were foremostly pointed at his rivals in FRELIMO, corrupt Tanzania politicians, and in a larger sense, the Portuguese colonial authority. But no one had strong evidence to back up these accusations.
What do you mean, no evidence?
Later, a former PIDE, or International and Defense State Police, Agent Oscar Cardoso claims that a fellow PIDE colleague, Casimiro Monteiro, planted the letter bomb. Number 4. Félix Moumié, Cameroon. Félix Moumié was another radical nationalist and anti-imperialist who, like RUBEN NYOBE, was a big threat to France's colonial grasp over Cameroon. He was an active member of UPC, Union des Populations du Cameroun, a left-wing independence movement at that time led by RUBEN NYOBE. After NYOBE died in 1955, Félix succeeded him as the leader of the movement until he died in 1960. For 25 years, France had led a brutal onslaught in the country. All of these were various attempts to quell opposition and maintain long years of dread within the hearts of the local people. It was therefore no huge task to also call for the death of the very present threat by the name of Félix Moumié. The French knew that losing to Félix Moumié and the UPC would instigate nationalist uprising in other French colonial territories. France thought to act, and to act fast. In October 1960, Félix Moumié was invited to dinner by William Bechtel, a 66-year-old who feigned interest in Moumié and the UPC's nationalist struggle while Moumié was in Switzerland. Unknown to the Cameroonian, this was a ploy to assassinate him. Interestingly, Félix was well aware of the manhunt by France against nationalists like him, but the man trusted in the neutrality that Switzerland had to offer. The nationalist was poisoned by a member of a secret French assassination unit, Le Main Rouge, and his long watch ended. Number 3. Thomas Sankara from Burkina Faso. Thomas Isidore Sankara, former Prime Minister and later President of Burkina Faso, was one of the very few men whose way of life exemplified the very words he spoke. Sankara had his infant nation in his heart at all times, inspiring him to execute several life-changing reforms during his brief stint as the nation's leader. During the initial stages of his administration, the man rode to his office on a bicycle. It was only after vehement protests by his cabinet that he opted for a Renault 5, one of the cheapest cars in the African nation. According to Sankara, administrative success wasn't the number of cars, houses, or properties accumulated. Rather, it was a benefit to be enjoyed by the people. To this effect, he unapologetically slashed in half his and his cabinet members' salaries and replaced the government-owned luxurious rides of political office holders with the Renault 5 cars. These sudden implementations were enough to make enemies of Sankara within and outside his cabinet. Sankara basked in the glory of what was a dream to other African nations. His administration saw rapid growth in education and health. In addition, Sankara was also seen as a feminist. He supported female education and established a day when men and women must switch traditional roles. In that single day, the men carried out all the women's chores, even buying groceries at the market. He was a man of the people, true and true. Sadly, Sankara's premature demise happened at the hand of his close friend and colleague, Blaise Compaoré, the very man with whom Sankara planned the 1983 coup that made him president. On October 15, 1987, Sankara was shot dead at age 37, ending a successful watch. Number 2. Muammar Gaddafi. On October 20th, 2011, different social media platforms worldwide were bombarded with numerous graphic videos of the brutal killing of former Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi.
He is gone for good.
His death was met with bittersweet responses from different countries and world powers. The United States and its allies celebrated the death of the Libyan dictator as a positive development for Libya. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton also made a posthumous comment about the late Libyan leader. She said,
He came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with
however, eons away in Russia, President Vladimir Putin beat himself for being unable to come to Gaddafi's aid. He regretted not having played a strong back role in ensuring that the Libyan president survived the overwhelming power against him. According to close sources, Putin watched the graphic videos of Gaddafi's assassination 3 times over. When Gaddafi became ruler of Libya, he met the African nation in a horrific economic state. During his 42-year regime, Gaddafi single-handedly raised the country into an economic fortune, making Libya the richest country in Africa. Under Gaddafi's leadership, Libya boasted its very own mega-project, the Great Man-Made River Project, a $33 billion undertaking independently financed by Libya's state-owned bank. It was the world's largest irrigation system before being reduced to rubble by US NATO bombings. Before the bombing, the world was made to believe that US NATO involvement in the Libyan civil war that led to Gaddafi's death was primarily humanitarian. I wonder what the irrigation system has to say about this.
There's no way,
Western intelligence vilified Gaddafi's government as unjust, undemocratic, and cruel. Horrid allegations were brought against him and his allies, but none of them held enough evidence to indict them.
No evidence, no fingerprints,
Then
nothing.
came December 2015, when about 3,000 emails from Hillary Clinton's private email server got into the hands of the public. The real motive behind the West's involvement was finally brought to light. In one of the emails sent to Hillary, Gaddafi's government is reported to have owned about 143 tons of gold and a similar amount in silver. The gold was to be used to establish a pan-African currency concerning the Libya golden dinar. The currency served as an alternative to the French franc in francophone African countries. Gaddafi's strategy was also to unify sovereign African states with one gold currency. The French authorities knew about this plan, and they did not like it at all. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy wanted a share in that juicy reserve to further strengthen his country's grasp over its African territories. In the end, it can be assumed that Muammar Gaddafi's assassination was based on political and economic interest rather than the much-believed liberation of the Libyan people from a cruel dictatorship. Number 1. Patrice Lumumba. The most popular amongst these great African leaders was Patrice Lumumba of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and inevitably our number 1. In October 1960, about 4 months after an exhilarating independence celebration held in the capital city of Kinshasa, Lumumba wrote these exact words to his wife: "Dead, living, free, or in the prison on the orders of the colonialists, it is not I who counts, it's the Congo, and it's our people for whom independence has been transformed into a cage where we are regarded from the outside." These passionate words exemplified the strong sense of patriotism Lumumba had towards his native land. It's safe to say figuratively that as many Congolese that could afford it had a picture of Lumumba in their wallets. In other words, he had the people's hearts in his hands. Lumumba had just been elected the first Prime Minister of post-colonial Congo in 1960, before his cruel assassination months later. It's widely believed that the United States was involved in the assassination in January 1961. Although no strong evidence has come to light, credible sources reveal that President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave an order for Lumumba's assassination with immediate effect. In 2002, Belgian authorities finally admitted their role in Lumumba's untimely death, but the United States remained mute.
Silent.
Even when accusatory fingers were openly pointed at them.
The CIA.
These are some of the brave leaders who simply fought for the freedom of their fatherland, but were treated egregiously. They are Africa's famous heroes and will be immortalized throughout generations. Does this brief history correspond with what you've heard about Africa? Do you know more? Let us know in the comments section.